Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Germantown Mayor Mike Palazzolo tonight on Behind the Headlines. Publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Mike Palazzolo, Mayor of Germantown. Thanks for coming back.
Glad to be here.
Along with Bill Dries, Senior Reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So we'll talk all things Germantown, tonight and get to everything that's going on, and there's a lot going on in Germantown. But I want to start with the Germantown Forward, the strategic plan that you all wrapped up. And it's interesting to see that what I think you just told me that it was the third of these plans that have been done over the last few years. And Memphis, we did a show just a couple weeks ago. They've begun rolling out their plan, first plan in a long time. Why are these plans important? And it's the same question I asked the Memphis people a couple weeks ago. How do you have a plan like this with a lot of lofty goals that doesn't just end up on the shelf, hey, that's nice, now let's do what we want to do?
Well, yeah, and I think that's why in my community, we've done 3 in 20 years. And so we had our first one in 95, a subsequent one in 05, and now our latest version in 2015. And we didn't tear up each one of them. We kind of fine-tuned them as you went. And so that's, I think, what keeps it from collecting dust on the shelf, is that you continually fine-tune the plan and engage your community.
And talk about, for people who aren't familiar, talk about the process and the involvement, because it's not just something where you hire a consultant and they come up with a pretty brochure and hand it to you. There's a whole lot of community, if done right, there's a lot of community engagement.
Sure, and that's one thing we take pride in Germantown. We're a city of process, a city of procedure, a city of engagement. In 95 and in 05, we hired a consultant, and our city administrator has been with us 28 years. The third time around, so to speak, said, hey, we can save $75,000 to $100,000. My staff, we've done this before, so we did it internally. And so we put together a steering committee of 30 residents. We had 28 adults and 2 teenagers. We'd never done that before. We wanted to get kind of their perspective as well. We took one from Houston High, one from Germantown High School. And so those 30 steering committee members met for a year. They developed 9 task force, and at the end of the product, so to speak, about 1,000 residents touched this new document, Germantown Forward 2030, which will take us to the next 15 to 30 years and beyond.
And let's try to make it tangible, and then I'll go to Bill. But
sure.
Just some of the examples of the things that were highlighted that are goals for Germantown, just some of the high points.
Sure. Well, the 9 task force include education, economic development, quality of life, natural resources. All those things come together to make a community. And so we put some emphasis on each one of those task force that then translates into strategic plans, goals, and objectives. One of them was our strategic business plan that we put in place. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit during the show.
Absolutely. Okay, Bill.
So in Germantown's case, the prominent feature that comes into play in I think certainly this latest plan is that there's no more annexation reserve area. So does that make it easier in a way? Because I think we've talked about this before, and that is, yeah, there's no reserve area, but that doesn't prevent like a remaking or a renovation of a Saddle Creek in an area that's identified as commercial real estate.
Sure, and I tell you what, at first we thought that would be a hindrance. We're fully annexed. We have no more reserve area. The town of Collierville, our neighbor to the east, has a significant reserve area. So at first we thought, boy, what a drawback. But in essence, we have kind of our picture drawn. We know how far we can go because our last annexation area occurred in 2000 when we annexed about 1,400 acres that makes up our Forest Hill Heights area, Forest Hill and Winchester. And so we know what we have left to develop. The city of Germantown has about 20 square miles of area. 17 of that, so roughly 85%, is residential, and that's that bedroom community feel. That's never going to change. We're not rezoning residential. It's already almost built out from that standpoint. The remaining property, 3 miles or 15%, is already commercially zoned, and that's made up of 5 key business nodes: Central Business District, the East Poplar and West Poplar gateways, the Wolf River Medical District, and the Forest Hill Heights, Winchester area. So our goal in the Germantown Forward 2030 and our smart growth plan and our key economic strategic plan was, how do we maximize the land we have left and meet the goals of our citizens. And so that's what we spent a year doing from an economic development standpoint. And it's been really great work because now we've seen the market embrace those plans, and they've come into Germantown.
And how? You just had big news with MAA locating its headquarters in the Trevere development,
Sure.
which I guess for old timers like me is where the Kirby Farms
Sure.
farmhouse what was at one time.
And let's say that MAA is Mid-America Apartments, big national, regional
Right.
apartment. They
Sure.
own apartments all over the country, but
Yeah, they
headquarters based here.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and they just merged with a company out of Atlanta, Post. We were very glad to have them stay in this region. You know, they were looking at Atlanta, Dallas, other places, and they're staying in the Memphis region in the city of Germantown. They're only moving about a half mile to the east to the Trevere project, but it's been a great economic boom for us in Germantown, and it's part of that plan that we've put into place, and we've seen that occur. You know, how do you kind of redevelop areas? That Western Gateway where they're going to build their headquarters, most of that was developed, it's already commercial, even though the 10 acres that was the Kirby farmhouse was much of a rural feel. Everything else in that area is developed. And it was all developed from 1968 to 1973. So it's kind of made it to its highest and best use, and it's kind of time to repurpose that land, whether that's Carrefour at Kirby or the area at Poplar and Kirby where Bank of Bartlett and other businesses are located. So we've enabled that legislation and that zoning, and so the market is slowly bringing it to us.
And it's a mixed use
Sure.
market in Germantown, as it is everywhere in Shelby County. That's really taken hold, and that seems to be something that's changed from when our cities made plans 15 years ago. Mixed use is the name of the game now.
Well, no doubt. And I know Eric and I have gotten the chance to get to know each other through our membership in the Urban Land Institute. You know, you can't have suburban without urban. It's in the word itself. When you look at mixed use, that's not a new concept. That's something that cities have embraced from the 1920s on. They've just changed formatting over time. You know, in the 70s, when Germantown grew residentially, we were pretty much a collection in our commercial zoning of just shopping centers. The city fathers and mothers did a good job of making sure they all connected via easements and cross access. But again, just a collection of shopping centers and a couple of small regional malls. All that's kind of been redeveloped. You know, the regional mall is no longer a regional mall. Most of our two malls have been turned inside out. They still have a shell of an interior, but everything is on the exterior. Now with the mixed use plan, the plan that we're very proud of is called Thornwood. It's about a $170 million plan, just a little bit to the north of GPAC, or Germantown Performing Arts Center. And it is truly 43 residentially zoned lots, high-end apartments, a hotel, retail, commercial, and restaurant, all on about 30 acres, which will make that part of the Central Business District very walkable. We dream and vision one day that people will walk from Thornwood. We have a 70-foot town clock there and a nice fountain that's very iconic. They'll walk to one of our 100 plus shows a year that are at GPAC. They'll walk over, they'll go to a restaurant, that type of thing. And we're starting to see more walkability in Germantown. We see a lot of people they've already walked in their neighborhoods for years, and we've got bike paths and greenways and that type of thing. But we're starting to see it in our Central Business District, and it's a good sign of being a healthy community.
And it's something that we associate, and maybe unfairly, with big cities and with urban core. So, downtown Memphis, or it's, downtown Detroit, or it's downtown, New York, that these kind of returning to Central Business District, returning to urban core, having that walkability. And we think of, maybe unfairly, maybe the media, whatever, that the suburbs don't do that. Suburbs aren't about walkability. They're about gated communities. Sure. They're about, big lots with houses on them removed, all that sense of removal. And some people really, when they say suburb, that's what
Sure.
they think. You've made a real conscious effort to get away from that. And did that come out of the planning? I mean, is that something that you and others imposed on the citizens
Yeah.
of Germantown, or was the Germantown residents saying, no, we want to transform our community?
Well, sometimes people in office get too much credit, and sometimes they get too much blame.
Right.
You know, in our community, it's really been market-driven, free markets. At one point in time, I've lived in the community now almost 40 years, and I'm 53 years old. So we moved to Germantown when I was a teen. Most people moved to the suburbs for that 1 acre lot with the nice fenced backyard, big deck, pool, that type thing. Well, over time, the market has changed. We're starting to see our housing stock in Germantown more resemble the Garden District in New Orleans, where you've got pretty substantial house on a small lot with very well landscaped amenities, but kind of a courtyard in the back. And so that leads to more density, more walkability. In the suburbs, you know, we've run into each other at downtown before. In the suburbs, we're not going to abandon our vehicles and our cars, but I think what we're trying to do is kind of the hub and spoke. We want our neighborhoods that are close to our business district, downtown, so to speak, to be able to walk to events, to our parks. We have 28 parks in Germantown. In our central business district, we have a half dozen parks. So we want people to push strollers there, ride bikes, and walk to those areas. So people are doing that. You know, in the suburbs, it always kind of gets me at times is that we'll have in the shopping center, someone will park their car in front of one business, and then they're going to go about 150 feet to the north. Then they move their car to the front of the other business. So just walk down the sidewalk. But that's slowly changing. And the denser you get, you create more walkability. And walkability is something that's not a negative word. It's something that's good for all rural, suburban, urban. So.
Yeah, well, we were at an Urban Land Institute event, and without getting, it was very esoteric, very kind of, but it was very interesting. It was a English guy, British guy, talking about how, you know, everyone wants to remake cities, and yet everyone holds a city like Paris, was his example, as the model, and everyone loves Paris, and that they figured it out hundreds of years ago that you would walk down the street and you would have a residence, and you'd have maybe a little workshop, and you'd have a little store, and it was all walkable, and it was all real close. And it did, we can move on here, but it was an eye-opening comment to me because he talked about how American cities and European cities got to where they would do big swaths of residential area, big swaths of commercial area, and that created the need for cars, and it reduced walkability because everything was so far apart. So anyway, it was an interesting point that, you know, we figured this out, you know, humans figured this out a long time ago when they did things like Paris and New York. But let's move a little bit more. You talked about, we talked about the strategic plan. One of those was, and I'm sure there are people listening who want to hear your perspective on, in the strategic plan, you know, city services and finance and financial responsibility, there was some real controversy about, you know, how the city administrator was paid and some back fees on car allowances, and there was some Freedom of Information Act. All this stuff is written about, and people can look it up. Your take on, I mean, is the city of Germantown being financially responsible with its employees right now?
Sure, without a doubt. I mean, without a doubt, I can unequivocally say that that's an accurate statement. You know, we make sure that we're good stewards of our residents' tax dollars, that we have fiduciary responsibility for that. You know, our city has been, we're very proud of the state of Tennessee. It just acquired AAA bond rated status in both Moody's and Standard & Poor's just this past spring. Our community's had that designation since 1988. And so that means that we're able to really make sure that financially planned and driven, we are that. And so, you know, we're constantly audited by the comptroller, and we're audited once a year. So, yeah, and you know, in all communities, you know, sometimes have a blemish or two, a mistake is made, and when those mistakes are taken care of properly, I think that's where citizens need to get some reassurance.
Is there enough transparency? Because I think that was one of the complaints that people had to, you know, some residents of Germantown filed Freedom of Information Act, and they got some emails, but I think it seemed like they felt like they had to fight to get the information about how their tax dollars are spent. I mean, does that need to be addressed differently? How transparency for the taxpayers?
Well, when you're sitting at the desk, so to speak, as mayor, or you're a city administrator or department head, I think you always feel like you're open and transparent. We can always do better. I mean, always do better. Some people are motivated different ways. We have residents that email me and others, our aldermen, all the time, and they get quick response, quick action. And others don't want to accept that, and they want to go the route of FOIA, which is fine as well. The media does that with a great amount of regularity to make sure that they're getting the proper information. And so, you know, and I'm a firm believer in the freedom of information. Years ago, when I was an alderman, the state legislature was considering repealing the Sunshine Law for locals. You know, in the legislature, they don't have to acknowledge the Sunshine Law. They can meet in small groups
Right.
without the media there or the citizenry.
Right.
We are held to a different standard. And so on record, our city passed a resolution saying we want to maintain the Sunshine Law in Germantown. We sent that as part of our legislative agenda, and that law never, Bill may remember that, it was probably in 07, 08, and that never made its way through Nashville. So our community actually went on record and said, let's preserve Sunshine because it's important and valuable to our residents and our community.
All right, Bill.
Mike, to what extent do you think the elections that we just saw this past November reflected some of the give and take, some of the debate about Germantown's direction? It was a pretty vigorous election cycle for Germantown.
Yeah, well, I'd say, and they all are. You know, our citizens are very active. They're very engaged. We have 98% of your populace has a high school diploma or higher, and 65% has a college degree or higher. They read. They are knowledgeable and they're active. And in this last election, we had 3 aldermen that ran for re-election. One incumbent drew no opposition. So you can make any kind of inference on whether he was doing a great job or not, but he drew no opposition. A second one did, and then a third alderman who was appointed to fill my vacated seat when I became mayor. That person did not win election, so they weren't an incumbent, so to speak. They were an appointee. So 2 incumbents won, you know, and those incumbents, the legislative branch does a good job of holding the checks and balances for the executive branch, so it'd be the mayor and the city administrator. We all work very well as a team because we do follow the blueprint, the Germantown Forward 30 plan. And again, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we're very much process driven, and we've learned over time in my 12 years in office, if you deviate from the process, you tend to not have a good outcome or a good product created. So we stick to that in Germantown. And, you know, I think, you know, to ask about open governing and transparency, we can always do better, and we strive to do better.
Let's go back to planning and development, because at some point there was talk about some changes, some pretty massive changes along the Germantown Road section, where that most folks know is the area where the commissary is, that particular stretch of road. And that's no longer the plan. What's happening with that? Because there were also traffic issues that were involved.
Sure. Well, you know, I'll give you a short history of that. So about 10 years ago, the Germantown Road Realignment program or project surfaced, and that came through the MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization. You know, Germantown has really developed as kind of the nexus or the center of this region. If you've been here any amount of time, you would say that Poplar and the Parkways was the middle of this area, and then Poplar and Highland, Poplar and 240. Now it's really Poplar and Germantown. And I'm talking about from North Mississippi to Arlington and to Fayette County to the river. So we've got major traffic that goes through our city. So this road realignment was a way to relieve traffic and take it through our community quicker. If you're moving from Olive Branch to Arlington, let's get you through our community with ease and safety, opposed to being bogged down in our community, so that our residents can use our roads as well. So that road realignment faced opposition. It was a platform issue when I ran for mayor, and I succeeded in winning that position. And so then as it came forward to be funded, there was opposition in the community, and our board decided that it wasn't in the best interest of Germantown and listened to our residents that organized. So currently that plan, that money has been, I guess, sent back to the MPO, and it's not on our 5-year CIP, and quite honestly, it's not in my administration's long-term planning.
You talked earlier about the strategic business plan. What is that?
Sure. Well, in 2012, and again, this is all part of kind of process. You know, I told you we had a comp plan in 95 and then 05, and then in 2015. Well, in 2012, we decided Germantown can't wait for the phone to ring anymore when it comes to economic development. We'd always been a community that when the market comes, we'll react. So we developed an economic strategic plan in 2012 and put that in place. Since that implementation, we have put on over $500 million of economic development in our commercial nodes, pretty substantial, from Thornwood, to the complete makeover of Saddle Creek, to the expansion of Saddle Creek, to Trevure, and other projects in between. So we've added about 375,000 square feet of retail space, about 200,000 square feet of commercial office space, and all that's very much occupied right now.
And how does that, I mean, what is the role of Germantown government in that? Because that's all private, I mean, that's primarily private investment, right? But the government, the city has a role in making that happen, which is what?
Well, we enable zoning. And so when you enable zoning and you rezone areas, so our 5 business districts, 3 have been rezoned smart code. And so that allows for mixed use. So as you rezone
Which, again,
your
the
property,
mixed use, just because we're familiar with that.
Yeah.
There's going to be residential, there's going to be commercial,
Yeah,
there's going to be office. All that's going to be close together versus, again, that's
live, work,
spread out.
play
Live,
is
work,
kind of one
yeah,
way of
okay.
thinking about it. And then
And
there are
that-
hybrids of that as
And
well.
so you think, I mean, going to that smart code and that mixed use, it was a no small part triggering that private investment.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. And I think the market saw that Germantown really wanted to not necessarily reinvent itself, but kind of make a transformation. And so in the Central Business District, you've got more opportunity to grow, but it's not going to interfere with the serenity of the neighborhood feel, which is outside of those nodes.
Am I right that Trevor, or the MAA building, the Mid-America Apartment Building, involved a pilot, right?
Sure.
When that's done through EDGE and so on. But I got to ask everybody who comes and sits at the table, because pilots are so controversial, and you know inevitably you get comments in the paper or people on the show who say, if that private business can't build that building or open that factory or do whatever they're going to do without a pilot, it shouldn't happen. There shouldn't be that sort of government support. What's your take?
Well, we've had an IDB, Industrial Development Board, for about 20 years, and that enables pilots or TIFs, tax increment financing. And yeah, and MAA did acquire a pilot. We've got 3 active pilots now in Germantown. And so we've been very wise. They're bringing jobs to our community, about 225 jobs that pay 163% of our median income in Germantown. Yeah. So these are jobs that are paying $90,000 plus a year. And those are people who will be moving into East Memphis, Germantown, Collierville, into this region. They'll be coming to our schools. They will be buying products in our shopping centers.
So the net math growth, when you do the pilot for you, you're saying it's a gain.
We're not putting on retail jobs.
Yeah.
We're putting on high-level professional jobs that will end up paying the community back in multiple fold.
Okay, we've got just 4 or 5 minutes left.
Sure.
Bill.
All right. Let's talk about the market for this, because my impression is that some of these companies who are looking around, some of these companies that are looking at retail expansions too, in many cases, these are long-held plans that weathered the recession, and they continually change them during that time, so it's not exactly the same plan. But is that what the market is out there, that's looking around at this point and making these plans?
Well, I think so. And I think, markets look at things like disposable income. They look at public safety. They look at how educated your workforce in your community are. They look at health care. All those things, we have that in Germantown. And so I think that's drawn the market. From a retail standpoint, at one point in time, our citizen surveys would come back each year. We survey our community every year. About 25% get a survey, and every 5 years, the entire community gets one. We have about 30% return rate, which is phenomenal. And our community has told us, they want more diversity in shopping, dining, and retail. And so the market has brought that. The new and improved Saddle Creek is phenomenal. That was the first lifestyle center in the country, and now it's about to have its 30th anniversary. So I think, Apple, when Apple did their redesign of their store, there were only 2 other prototypes in the world of that redesign, Hong Kong and Dubai. Hong Kong, Dubai, and Germantown is generally not synonymous. You don't hear those 3 cities mentioned in the same breath very often. Maybe this shows the first place. And so when Apple came in and doubled their store size, they could have gone somewhere else. They were the first Apple store in the Mid-South. There's now one in Nashville. And so that's kind of an investment in our community, and it's also, they see our community has great value.
Just a couple minutes left. We've got to talk about the schools. What is the status? I mean, again, for people unfamiliar, the 3 Germantown schools that stayed with Shelby County Schools in the whole consolidation, deconsolidation, and all that ruckus. What's the status of those?
Well, 2 minutes isn't long enough, but I'll do my best.
I know.
So we've got about 530 more students than anticipated. So people are coming to our community. They are moving to Germantown for many reasons, and we don't have enough time to go into them. But we have 530 more children than seats. So we have that pleasant problem of having to build or buy existing from Shelby County Schools. We've continued that dialogue with the superintendent, with Dorsey Hobson, with the school board chair, and we continue to talk with them. We've got great relations. They're going through their own facility study right now, and we hope that that will lead to more dialogue. But when push comes to shove, our community is not going to live with modular portables to put these 500 children. Yeah. We're going to have brick and mortar, and so we're looking for school sites right now.
Okay, so, I was going to say, I mean, the dialogue, but Shelby County Schools is a huge system. They've got a lot of issues they're remaking. I mean, how much patience can you have?
Well, I've mentioned this in my own community. We've gone on a dual track. We're either going to build or continue to negotiate, but we cannot put our fate in other people's hands. Now, whether it's the SCS, SCC, the county commission, we have to control our own fate and destiny, and that's what we'll do in Germantown.
Okay, just a minute left, Bill.
But you have looked across the border, though, and you've seen areas since Shelby County Schools is talking about building some new schools, 3 as 7 others close. You think there might be room for some school growth near your border on the Memphis side of that?
Well, we know southeast Shelby County is still growing, and there's a need for schools there. If you look at Southwind and Lawrence and those different areas, there's still growth there. I know that when we talked to the superintendent a while back in the spring, they have capacity. They could put children in seats close to schools in those neighborhoods, but they come to Germantown. We're glad they're investing in our community, but we would hope that maybe they would invest in some of their own neighborhoods.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have. We didn't get to everything, but we got to enough. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night. Sit tight for a second. Thank you.